Ironically, to black radicals of the 20th century, one of the most compelling features of Marxism was its apparent universalism. Unlike the dominant historical discourse of the 19th century, historical materialism was inflected by an internationalism and a scientific rigor which plainly transcended the obnoxious and sinister claims for destiny exhibited by such conceits as German nationalism, British imperialism, and the racism of the white man's burden, and so forth. For a time, then, Marxism might have seemed an effective antidote to contemporary discourse, but Marxism's internationalism was not global. Its materialism was exposed as an insufficient explanator of cultural and social forces, and its economic determinism, too, often politically compromised freedom struggles beyond or outside of the metropole. For black radicals, historically and immediately linked to social bases predominantly made up of peasants and farmers in the West Indies, or sharecroppers and peons in North America, or forced laborers in colonial plantations in Africa, Marxism appeared distracted from the cruelest and most characteristic manifestations of the world economy. This exposed the inadequacies of Marxism as an apprehension of the modern world, but equally troubling was Marxism's neglect and miscomprehension of the nature and genesis of liberation struggles which already had occurred and surely had yet to appear among these peoples. The black radical tradition was a creation over generations of collective intelligence gathered from struggle. Hold up. Sorry, friends. Let me find my... There it is. Whoa. Gathered from struggle. In the daily encounters and petty resistances to domination, slaves had acquired a sense of the calculus of oppression, as well as its overt organization and instrumentation. These experiences lent themselves to a means of preparation for more epic resistance movements. The first organized revolts in the slave castles in Africa and on board slave ships were generally communal in the terms of their old world kinship. Bambara, Ghana, Ganga, Yoruba, etc. These rebellions sought return to African homelands and to repair the discontinuity produced by enslavement and transportation. Later in the colonial settlements, when conditions were favorable, revolts also took form as maroonage, a concession to the relocation of slavery and to the new syncretic cultural identities emergent from the social cauldron of slave organization. Newly transported outlaw Africans and Creole blacks and sometimes Native Americans and European slaves withdrew beyond the patrolled presence of exploitation to forge egalitarian societies. With each historical moment, however, the rationale and cultural mechanisms of domination became more transparent. Race was an epistemology, its ordering principles, its organizing structures, its moral authority, its economy of justice, commerce, and power. Aristotle, one of the most original aristocratic apologists, had provided the template in natural law. In inferiorizing women, the deliberative faculty of the soul is not present at all in the slaves. In women, it is present but ineffective. Babe, you are so dumb. Politics, some numbers. Non-Greeks and all laborers, slaves, artisans, farmers, wage workers, etc. The masses of mankind are evidently quite slavish in their tastes, preferring a life suitable of beasts. Nicomachean ethics. I'm never going to read this. Aristotle had articulated an uncompromising racial construct, and from the 12th century on, the European ruling order and from the 12th century on, one European ruling order after another, one cohort of clerical or secular propagandists following another, reiterated and embellished this racial calculus. As the black radical tradition was distilled from the racial antagonisms which were arrayed along a continuum from the casual insult to the most ruthless and lethal rules of law, from the objectification of entries to marine cargo manifestations, auction, accountancy, plantation records, broadsheets and newspapers, from the loftiness of Christian pulpits and biblical exchange. Let's look up this word because I don't know what it means. Lee dee 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 dee, la dee da dee da, la dee da dee da 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 da, ma na 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 na. Smallest. Okay, how do you pronounce? Small and often not important details. That's what it means. How do you spell it? Minutia. Pronunciation.
Minutia.
Oh, minutia of slave naming, dress types and food, and a legion of other significations. The terrible culture of race was revealed. Inevitably, the tradition was transformed into a radical force, and in its most militant manifestation, no longer accustomed to the resolution that flight and withdrawal were sufficient. The purpose of the struggles informed by the tradition became the overthrow of the whole race-based structure. In the studies of these struggles, and often through engagement with them, the Black radical tradition began to emerge and overtake Marxism in the work of these Black radicals. W.E.B. Du Bois in the midst of an anti-lynching movement, C.L.R. James in the vortex of anti-colonialism, and Richard Wright, the sharecropper's son, all brought forth aspects of the militant tradition which had informed successive generations of Black freedom fighters. These predecessors were Africans by origin, predominantly recruited from the same cultural matrices. No, I want the pronunciation. Matrices. Oh, I was kind of right. Subjected to similar and interrelated systems of servitude and oppression, and mobilized by identical impulses to recover their dignity. And over the centuries, the liberation projects of these men and women in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas acquired similar emergent collective forms in rebellion and maroonage, similar ethical and moral articulations of resistance. Increasingly, they emerged as a function of what Hegel might have recognized as the negation of the negation in the world system. Hegel's cunning of the history, for one instance, was evident when the late 18th century, 19th centuries Franco-Haitian slave owners fled to Louisiana, Virginia, and the Carolinas, with as many slaves as they could transport, thereby also transporting the Haitian Revolution. The outrage, courage, and vision of that revolution helped inspire the Pointy Coup conspiracy. Girl, let's look that one up because I want to say that one right. Pointier Coup. How do you pronounce that? Point Coupe. Oh, Point Coupe conspiracy in 1795 in Louisiana, the Gabrielle-led rebellion in 1800 Virginia, and the rebellions organized by Denmark Vesey in 1822 outside of Charleston. And in turn, Denmark's movement informed the Revolutionary Tract Appeal in 4 articles, together with a preamble to the colored citizens of the world, but in particular to, and very expressly, to those in the United States of America. penned by David Walker. Ooh, we should read that. Oh, David Walker's Appeal. I think that's the same thing, but I'm not particularly sure. But I think it is. It says appeal in 4 articles, and David Walker's Appeal is 4 articles. So I would love to do a video of me reading David Walker's Appeal. So that'll be another time. Du Bois drew on Hegelian dialects and Marxist notions of class struggle to correct the interpretation of the American Civil War and its subsequent Reconstruction period grown dominant in the American historiography. For instance, Woodrow Wilson's A History of the American People, published in 1908, in Popular Culture, Thomas Dixon's and D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, 1915. Undaunted by the fact that he was already on forbidden terrain in the thinking of Hegel, Marx, and his own American contemporaries, Du Bois ventured further, uncovering the tradition. Almost simultaneously, James discovered the tradition in the Haitian Revolution. And only a little later, Wright contributed his own critique of proletarian politics from the vantage point of the Black radical tradition. For Du Bois, James, and Wright, Marxism became a staging area for their immersion into the tradition. Black Marxism was not a site of contestation between Marxism and the tradition, nor a revision. It was a new vision centered on a theory of the cultural corruption of race, and thus the reach and and cross-fertilization of the tradition became evident in the anti-colonial and revolutionary struggles of Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas. As a culture of liberation, the tradition crossed the familiar bounds of social and historical narratives, just as in the 18th century and 19th centuries. To take one instance, African maroonage infected Native American and African settlements in Florida to produce the Black Seminoles, who fought against the United States for 3 decades. The tradition was effused in myriad of forms and locations. For some sense of diversity, one might examine how the tradition insinuated itself quite unexpectedly into the writings of Harriet Beecher Stowe when she authored A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, and particularly Dread, A Tale of the Great Dismal Swamp. Ooh. In 1856, into the Blacks who volunteered during the Civil War, and those in the American military who sent letters of outrage from the Philippines during the Spanish-American War, into the Pentecostalism in the early 20th century, into the blues composed by Rainey and all the women named Smith, and into the filmic works of Oscar Micheaux, Micheaux. I don't know how to pronounce it. During the silent film era. Reviewing this list, I suspected the Black radical tradition extends into cultural and political terrains far beyond my competence to relate. In short, as a scholar, it is never my purpose to exhaust the subject, only to suggest it was there. Ooh, whoa. Preface. It is always necessary to know what a book is about, not just what has been written in it, but what was intended when it was written. This work is about our people's struggle, the historical Black struggle. It takes as a first premise that for a people to survive and struggle, it must be on its own terms. The collective wisdom, which is a synthesis of culture and the experience of that struggle. The shared past is precious, not for itself, but because it is the basis of consciousness, of knowing, of being. It cannot be traded in, exchanged for expedient alliances, or traduced by convenient abstractions or dogma. It contains philosophy, theories of history, and social prescriptions native to it. It is a construct possessing its own terms, exacting its own truths. I have attempted here to demonstrate its authority. More particularly, I have investigated the failed efforts to render the historical being of Black peoples into a construct of historical materialism, to signify our existence as merely an opposition to capitalistic organization. We are that, because we must be, but much more. For the younger brothers and sisters, and for those who identify with the Black struggle, who are tempted by the transubstantiation of Black history to European radical theory, this book is a challenge. I humbly submit this work to you and to the others with whom the project had its beginnings. Mary Agnes Lewis, Margot Deschelles, Frederick Douglass Lewis, Welton Smith, Sherman Williams, Nebbie Lou Crawford, Jim Lacey, Goplan Shyamala, J. Wright, J. Herman Blake, Don Hopkins, Ramsey, Donald Warden, and the others I met along the way. Acknowledgements. This work began while I was teaching at Binghamton, New York. By the time it was finished, my family and I had moved to Santa Barbara region of California. In between, we had spent a year in the small English village of Radwinter, south of Cambridge. In sum, this covered a period of almost 6 years. During this time, support for the research and writings was extended to me by the SUNY Binghamton Foundation, the University of California at Santa Barbara, and the National Research Council and Ford Foundation program of postdoctoral fellowships for minorities. Such support was important, but even more important was that extended by the staff at the Center for Black Studies. Oh, I thought it paused. At UC Santa Barbara, headed by Alice Whitted, its administrative assistant at heart. They constituted a second family within which it was possible to work on matters of seriousness and purpose. In England, this support was augmented by my friend at the Institute of Race Relations, A. Sylvanden, Jenny Bourne, Colin Prescott, Hazel Walters, Paul Gilroy, Lou Kushnick, Danny Riley, Harsh Punja, and Tony Bunye. I am also deeply indebted. Oh, please mind any pronunciation I do wrong. I also am deeply indebted to my editors at Zed Press, Robert Moulton and Anna Gurley. To them is owed any coherence which might exist in the work that follows. Among the number of scholars to whom an intellectual acknowledgement is owed, I must distinguish St. Clair Drake. Both his patience and example are reflected in the body of work. He carries his knowledge with wisdom and grace. The last word is reserved for my family. Elizabeth, who read the first writings and suggested their worth, and Najda, who will someday, I hope, share that opinion. 6 of her first 8 years are at stake. I expect she will, if for no other reason than the authority of her mother, who read every line of this manuscript and suggested some. To the 2 of them, I extend my deepest appreciation. The introduction. Let's get it. This study attempts to map the historical and intellectual contours of the encounter of Marxism and Black radicalism, 2 programs for revolutionary change. I have undertaken this effort in the belief that in its way each represents a significant and imminent mode of social resolution, but that each is particular and critically different realization of a history. The point is that they may be so distant as to be incommensurable. At issue here is whether this is so. If it is, judgment must be made, choices taken. The inquiry required that both Marxism and Black radicalism be subjected to interrogations of unusual form. The first, Marxism, because few of its adherents have striven hard enough to recognize its profound but ambiguous indebtedness to Western civilization. The second, Black radicalism, because the very circumstance of its appearance has required that it be misinterpreted and diminished. I have hoped to contribute to the correction of these errors by challenging, in both instances, the displacement of history by aeriform theory and self-serving legend. Whether I have succeeded is for the reader to judge, but first it may prove useful to outline the construction of the study. In Western societies, for the better part of the past 2 centuries, the active and intellectual opposition of the left to class rule has been vitalized by the vision of socialist order, an arrangement of human relations grounded on the shared responsibility and authority over the means of social production and reproduction. The variations on the vision may have. I didn't have this part highlighted because listen. I read the book first on PDF. Oh, well, I have this part highlighted on the PDF, so I didn't. You get it. I get it. It's hard to read, y'all. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, reading out loud, they did not like me for popcorn read. Excuse me. The Western societies, for a better part of the past 2 centuries, the active and intellectual opposition to the left two-class rule has been vitalized by the vision of socialist order, an arrangement. Ooh, I should write that down. An arrangement of human relations grounded on the shared responsibility and authority over the means of social production and reproduction. The variations on the vision have been many, but over the years of struggle, the hardiest tradition have proven to be that identified with the work and writings of Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and V.I. Lenin. Obviously, here the term tradition is used rather loosely, since the divergence of opinion and deed between Marx, Engels, and Lenin have been demonstrated by history to be as significant as their correspondence. Nevertheless, in common as well as academic parlance, these three activist intellectuals are taken to be the principal figures of Marxist or Marxist-Lenin socialism. Marxism was founded on the study of the capitalist expropriation and exploitation of labor, as first taken up by Engels, then elaborated by Marx's material theory of history, his recognition of the evolving systems of capitalist production and the inevitability of class struggle, and the later augmentation of Lenin's conception of imperialism, the state, and the dictatorship of the proletariat, and the role of the Revolutionary Party. It has provided the ideological, historical, and political vocabulary for much of the radical and revolutionary presence emergent in modern Western societies. Elsewhere, in lands economically parasitized by the capitalist world system, or in those rare instances where its penetration has been quarantined by competing historical formations, some sort of Marxism have again translated a concern with fundamental social change. However, it is still fair to say that at base, that is at its epistemological substratum, Marxism is a Western construction, a conceptualization of human affairs and historical development that is emergent from the historical experiences of European peoples, mediated in turn through their civilization, their social orders, and their cultures. Certainly, its philosophical origins are indisputably Western, but the same must be said of its analytical presumptions, its historical perspectives, and its point of view. The most natural consequence, though, has assumed a rather ominous significance, since European Marxists have presumed more frequently than not their project is identical with world historical development. Confounded, it would seem, by the cultural zeal that accompanies ascendant civilizations, they have mistaken for universal verities the structures and social dynamics retrieved from their own distant and more immediate pasts. Even more significantly, the deep structures of historical materialism, the foreknowledge for its comprehension of historical movement, have tended to relieve European Marxists from the obligation of investigating the profound effects of culture and historical experience on their science. The ordering ideas that have persisted in Western civilization, and Marx himself, as we shall see, was driven to admit such phenomena, reappearing in suggestive stages of development to dominant arenas of social ideology, have little or no theoretical justification for Marxism for their existence. One such reoccurring idea is racialism, the imitation and corroboration. Oh, I did say that right. Of social organization as natural by reference of the racial components of its element. Being like, oh, racism, like the ideas of race is like natural. Like that's what, yeah. Though hardly unique to European people, its appearance and codification during the feudal period into Western conceptions of society was to have important and enduring consequences. Meaning, like, okay, there's this idea of race before, like, racism before race. As we know it, social construction, that's what it's getting at. Like, there was racism before the idea of white and black. Irish people were the first black people in terms of they were seen as inferior to English men, for example. The book will get more into it, like, a more in-depth understanding. Sorry, friends. I have not drinking a lot of coffee this morning, and I need some water. Okay, I'm going to pause here and then do the next clip. In the first part of this study, I have devoted 3 chapters to explicating the appearance and formulation of racial sensibility in Western civilization and its social and ideological consequences. Chapter 1 reconstructs the history of the emergence of racial order in feudal Europe and delineates its subsequent impact on the organization of labor under capitalism. Racism, I maintain, was not simply a convention of ordering the relations of Europeans to non-Europeans, but has its genesis in the internal relations of European peoples. As part of the inventory of Western civilization, it would reverberate within and without, transferring its toll from the past to the present. In contradictions, in contradistinction to Marx and Engels' expectations that bourgeoisie society would rationalize social relations and demystify social consciousness, the obverse occurred. The development, organization, and expansion of capitalist society pursued essentially racial directions. So too did social ideology. As a material force, then, it would be expected that racialism would inevitably permeate the social structures emergent from capitalism. I have used the term racial capitalism to refer to this development and to the subsequent structure as a historical agency. The second chapter, as it rehearses the formation of the working class in England, looks precisely at this phenomena. Since the English working classes were the social basis for Engels' conceptualization of the modern proletariat and conjoined with the sans-culotte of the French Revolution to occupy a similar place in Marx's thought, their evolving political and ideological character is of signal importance in reckoning the objective basis for Marxist theory. Of particular interest is the extent to which racialism and subsequently nationalism, both as an ideology and actuality, affected the class consciousness of workers in England. In the intensely racial social order of England's industrializing era, the phenomenology of the relations of production bred no objective basis for the extrication of the universality of class from the particularisms of race. Working class discourse and politics remained marked by the architectonic possibilities previously embedded in the culture, meaning it's like racism is embedded within capitalism because that's literally what it was built on. You can't have one without the other, because at the foundation, at the root, racism and capitalism like this. At the appearance of European socialism and its development into a tradition somewhat at odds with socialism's subsequent historiography and orthodoxies. The third chapter pursues among the middle classes the obscured origins of socialism and the contradictions that weakened its political and ideological expressions. It was indeed nationalism, a second bourgeoisie creation, that most subverted the socialist creation. Okay. It's so pretty outside. The blues. I wanted to play jazz in the background, but I don't know if I'm allowed to just like play jazz off my Spotify. Smooth jazz. But it was purple clouds and now they're beautifully blue. I'm sorry. Pause. Do y'all want to see some new books I got? Oh wait, the camera's over here. Hey, gotta remember to do that. Freedom Dreams. The Black Radical Imagination. I will be reading this for y'all. The Collected Poems of June Jordan. Directed by Desire. But I'm going with Desiree. Directed by Desire. Nope, I'm wrong. That's the title. Okay, the collected poems of Audre Lorde, bro. Don't play with her. Let's open. Do you ever like to spring, people? I'm not supposed to be opening this right now. Do y'all want to hear? A little break. A little break never hurt nobody. What my children learns of the sea. What my children learns of the sea, of the summer thunders, of the riddles that hide in the curve of spring, she will learn in my twilights and childlike revise every autumn. What my child learns as her winter grows into time has ripened in my own body to enter her eyes with first light. This is why, more than blood or the milk I have given, one day a strange girl will step to the back of a mirror, cutting my ropes of sea and thunder and spring, of the way she will taste her autumns, toast brittle or warmer than sleep, and the words she will use for winter. I stand already condemned. Gemini! Is she a Gemini? Okay, sorry. Back to one distraction. Nationalism, as a mix of racial sensibility and the economic interests of the national bourgeoisie, was as powerful an ideology impulse as any spawned from these strata. As an acquired temper and a historical force met on the fields of social and political revolution, nationalism bemused the founders of historical materialism and those who followed them. Wait, let's put a little underline. Ooh, yeah. 3 lines. 3. Okay. Founders of historical materialism and those who followed them. It was to overtake both the direction of capitalist development and eventually the formative structures of socialist societies as they appeared in the present century. The historical trajectories of those developments, again, were almost entirely unexpected in a theoretical universe from which it had been discerned that ideology and false consciousness were supposedly being expelled. When in its time Black radicalism became manifest within Western society as well as other junctures between European and African peoples, one might correctly expect that Western radicalism was no more receptive to it than were the apologists of power. Part 2 takes up this other radical tradition, Black radicalism. The condition of its historical break. Pause. Do you ever do that? I have to remind myself to slow down. You're right there. Drink more water. Y'all, I want to figure out how to find like clean, free water. That'd be cool. And I need to figure out when I'm going to grow plants. I got some pots today. Okay, stop. Part 2 takes up this other radical tradition, Black radicalism, the conditions of its historical emergence, its form, and its nature. This exposition begins in Chapter 4 with the reinvestigation of the past relations between Europeans and Africans, a past that has been transformed by Europeans and for Europeans into a grotesque parody, a series of legends as monstrosely proportioned as Pliny's Blemier, whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders. That part is really interesting, reflecting how like the Western world is abnormal to human development, abnormal to nature's development. Their head is growing beneath their shoulders, meaning it's upside down. They're backwards people. To me, that's what it means. Okay, the obscuring of the Black radical tradition is seated at the West's suppression of suppression of Europeans' previous knowledge of the African and its own past. The denial of history to African people took time, several hundreds of years, beginning with the emergence of Western Europeans from the shadows of Muslim domination and paternalism. It was also a process that was to transport the image of Africa across separate planes of dehumanization latticed by the emerging modalities of Western culture. In England, at first gripped by a combative and often hysterical Christianity, compliments of the Crusades, the Reconquest, and the rise of Italian capitalism, medieval English devout recorded dreams in which the devil appeared as a black Moor, an Ethiopian. This was part of the grammar of the church. I definitely need to get a microphone so y'all can hear me all the time. Or I can use my AirPods. My room's a mess. So, we're going to have to deal for now and then see what we can do. This is part of the grammar of the church, the most singular repository of knowledge in Europe. Centuries later, the satanic gave way to the representation of Africans as a different sort of beast, dumb, animal labor, that benighted recipients of the beautiful sky. Okay. Let's connect that church. The church. Later, the satanic gave way to the representation of Africans, as a different sort of beast, dumb, animal labor, the benighted recipient of the benefits of slavery. Thus, the Negro was conceived. The Negro, whose predestined could be found in the racial fabrication concealing the Slavs, the slaves, the Irish, and others, substantially eradicated in Western historical consciousness the necessity of remembering the significance of Nubia for Egypt's formation, of Egypt in the development of Greek civilization, of Africa for imperial Rome, and more pointedly of Islam's influence on Europe's economic, political, and intellectual history. From such a creature, not even the suspicion of tradition needed to be entertained. In its stead, there was the black slave, a consequence masqueraded as an anthropology and a history. Ooh, yeah. The creation of the Negro was obviously at the cost of the immense expenditures of psychic and intellectual energies in the West. The exercise was obligatory. It was an effort commensurate with the importance black labor power possessed for the world economy, sculpted and dominated. Listen, and it's still like that right now. Congo, Sudan, Palestine. Let's keep it going. Eggs, bacon, grits. I think even Haiti. I need to learn more about that, especially right now. Dominated by the ruling and mercantile classes of Western Europe. As Chapter 5 indicates, the Atlantic slave trade and the slavery of the New World were integral to the modern world economy. Huh? And they trying to downplay slavery? Oh, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. Really? Really, it wasn't that bad? Their relationship to capitalism was historical and... Sorry, friends. Ooh. I need more water, and I need to clean my room. And to get another light in here. Let's keep it going. The relationship to capitalism was historical and organic rather than advantageous or synthetic. The Italian financiers and merchants whose capital subsidized Iberian exploration in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, were also masters of large European slave colonies in the Mediterranean. Certainly, slave labor was one of their bases for what Marx termed primitive accumulation. But it would be an error to arrest the relationship there, assigning slave labor to some pre capitalist stage of history. For more than 300 years, slave labor persisted beyond the beginnings of modern capitalism, complementing wage labor, peonage, serfdom, and other methods of labor coercion. Ultimately, that meant that the interpretation of history in terms of the dialectic of capitalist class struggle would prove inadequate, a mistake ordained by the preoccupation of Marxism with the industrial and manufacturing centers of capitalism, a mistake found in the presumptions that Europe itself had produced, that the motive and material forces that generated the capitalist system were to be wholly located in what was a fictive historical entity. From its very foundations, capitalism had never been, in any more than Europe, a closed system. Necessarily, then, Marx and Engels' theory of revolution was insufficient in scope. The European proletariat and its social allies did not constitute the revolutionary subject of history, nor was the working class consciousness necessarily the negation of bourgeoisie's culture. Out of what out of what is in reality a rather more complex capitalist world system, and one in which Marx in his last decade paid closer attention, other revolutionary forces emerged as well. Informed as they were by the ideas and cultures drawn from their own historical experiences, these movements assumed forms only vaguely anticipated in the radical traditions of the West. In the terms of capitalist society, they were its negation. They said, actually, shut it down. Shut it down now. But that was hardly the source of their being, and among them was the persistent and continuously evolving resistance of African peoples to oppression. The 6th chapter rehearses the history of the black radical tradition in the African diaspora, and to some extent in the African continent itself, as both this and the 7th chapter attempts to demonstrate the record of resistance for 4 centuries or more, from Nueva España to Nyasaland, 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 I think, leaves in no doubt the specifically African character of those struggles. Resistance was formed through the meanings that Africans brought to the New World as their cultural possessions, meanings sufficiently distinct from the foundation of Western ideas to be remarked upon over and over by the European witness of their manifestations, meanings enduring and powerful enough to survive slavery, to become the basis of the opposition to it. With Western society as a condition, the tradition almost naturally seemed a theoretical aspect as well. The third and final section of the study traces the social and intellectual backgrounds of these processes that led to the theoretical articulation of black radicalism. The conditions for modern black theory were present first in the African diaspora. Eat it up. Far from Africa and physically enveloped by hostile communities, black opposition acquired a penetrative comprehension. But it was social and political as well as historical process that nurtured theory. In the pursuit of that process, I have identified 3 seminal black radical intellectuals: William Edward Burkhard Du Bois, Cyril Lionel Robert James, and Richard Nathaniel Wright. They have been chosen for detailed treatment not only because they made substantial contributions to the theoretical text, but because their lives and circumstances were prisms of the events impending on and emanating from the black radical tradition. Their reactions to their confrontation with black resistance, the very means used for their expression, were distinct but related, characterized by circumstances, temperament, and training. Sorry for a blocked nose, y'all. I'll blow it out for the next clip. Though their lives were very dissimilar, only right could be said to have been directly only right could be said to have been directly produced by the black peasant and working classes. They have all come to that tradition late and hesitantly, as I will argue, with respect to Du Bois and James. For all three, though, Marxism had been the prior commitment, the first encompassing and conscious experience of organized opposition to racism, exploitation, and domination. As Marxists, their apprenticeships proved to be significant but ultimately unsatisfactory. At times, events and experience drew them towards black radicalism and the discovery of the collective black resistance inspired by an enduring cultural complex of historical apprehension. In these concluding chapters, I have attempted to demonstrate how and why this was so. Taken together, the efforts of Du Bois, James, and Wright consisted of a first step towards the creation of an intellectual legacy that would complement the historical force of the black struggle. Their destiny, I suggest, was not to create the identity of the struggle so much as to articulate it. Regardless, the black opposition to domination has continued to acquire new forms. In a very real sense, then, the present study follows. Oh, we're down here. Okay, purr.